Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? Pretty good? Wow. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming here to see this presentation. I am very honored to be invited to speak here in front of you guys. Very, very exciting. I have to say, it's funny, but the number one question that I get, no matter what I'm doing, education, photo tours, workshops, is how do you pronounce your name? That's the number one question I get out of anything. So I'm going to go ahead and say my name is Elia Locardi. That's the way I pronounce it, Elia. You can say Elia. If you're like my Colombian friends, you can say Elia, because they got, that little sing-song to their voice, and they like to accent the I's. It's a very interesting name. There's kind of a story to it, but I won't get into that. I am a world travel photographer and educator, the education portion being kind of what I'm doing today. But essentially that means that I carry very heavy camera bags all over the world, on and off airplanes, buses. I've done horseback, muleback, everything. I've fallen asleep on every type of public transportation imaginable. And in that time, I've actually traveled to almost 60 countries, or more than 60 countries. And I'm getting actually close to about 2 million miles, which is really, really interesting. Even with Delta, I've been flying Delta for a while. I'm about to cross 1 million miles with Delta, which is kind of exciting. So what I'm going to do is have that glass of champagne that they give you on the flight and also promptly schedule an MRI. Flying is really fun to propel yourself around the globe, but it's also, you guys know, jet lag. And does anybody know the cure for jet lag? You do? Really? What is it? I have no idea. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still think there is no cure. My Indonesian friends tell me it's spicy food, but this has never worked. That's a good one. Yeah, don't sleep for the first night. My wife's a master of that. I just fall right asleep. That's what I do. I sleep all the time. But it's actually interesting. So I've been full-time on the road since 2009, and that's a lot of flying. So traveling that much to and from a location, in 2012, my wife and I decided to do something a little bit different, a little bit unconventional, and that was become 100% location independent. Now, location independent was basically a term that we researched, because basically what we did is we sold nearly everything we owned so that we could travel full-time on the road without a home base. And the reason that we selected location independence as a term was it's much better than telling your parents you're going to be homeless. We really thought about this. I thought, like, Mom, I'm going to be homeless for a while. That would go bad. But when I said, Mom, we're going to be location independent, we're going to travel full-time, and it's going to be great, she's like, wonderful, it sounds like you have everything figured out. Little did she know we had nothing figured out. But basically what you're seeing here is this was our apartment before we left. I was blogging about this on Google+, which was really big at the time in 2012. Last thing I did, close the laptop in the bag. I put those boxes in the garbage, and we flew from Central Florida to Sydney, Australia, and it was one-way travel for years and years. So it was really fun. It gave us the opportunity to really travel the world and have incredible experiences all over the place. And you can see that sometimes, I do require the help of some locals there with my camera gear when I'm hiking. But up there on the left, you guys see those bags? You guys might see like a roller bag, a shoulder bag. You might even be able to pick out the brands. What I actually see is a living room, a kitchen, the bathroom, the office. It's basically our mobile command station, like we say. Everything that we do in business, photography, we have to travel with all the time. And it's really important too, if you guys are hiking, a lot of you guys have done hiking trips, you're going out in the desert here, you know how everybody tells you it's really important to stay hydrated? It's a lie. Stay caffeinated. Caffeine is the most important thing. Caffeine is the most important thing for doing this. It propels me around the globe and is the best temporary cure for jet lag. So this is a 2-cup espresso maker that you plug into the wall, and it makes wonderful coffee no matter where you are in the world. That is the most important possession I have, and I actually used it before I came here. This thing has saved my life so many times. And the gear changes too. That's something that I'll sort of talk about in this presentation. The gear changes. It evolves. Years ago, the cameras weren't as powerful and the raw technology is today, and now we have flying cameras, like drones, which are incredible to get interesting things. So the gear constantly changes, but what remains the same is we stay on the road. We try to pack as well as we can. A little explanation about this. Those are actually boarding passes. Now, I started collecting boarding passes for a simple reason. Traveling the world, if you guys go somewhere, say you go to Thailand, you want to bring back a souvenir. We went to Turkey and they have the Turkish lamps, so I wanted to bring back a souvenir. But when everything has to fit in these bags, how can you have souvenirs? Where do they go? They just end up in storage. So I started collecting boarding passes, bag tags, train tickets, bus tickets, things like that. And this collection got pretty big. And one day, this was actually what would be equivalent of home. It's a 5-foot by 5-foot storage unit. We decided to take all these and lay these out and see how the collection went. And I've been collecting them since. My wife has gotten tired of all of these pieces of paper everywhere, but they are stacking up. But it's fun. So that's our sort of way of collecting. This is a fun image. I keep this because going back to the United States now is really easy. Like I just scan my passport, I have global entry, everything's easy, never have to fill out a form. But it used to be so fun to write 20 countries on this thing and spill over to the other side of the page and hand it to the customs person and just have them look at it and just their eyes get really wide. And they're like, they don't even know what to say. They're like, welcome home. And that's it. So I kind of miss those days. It was always interesting. But this experience of being able to travel full-time, be location independent, has given us a wonderful opportunity to spend as much time as possible in locations around the world. Getting to know people, doing workshops, photo tours, photo walks, meetups, and things like that. I use social media a lot. Some of you guys might follow me on social media. Love Instagram, love Facebook. A lot of us have been able to connect and everything. But this is more important to me, something like this, being able to connect in person. And that's something that we're missing in the digital age. So being able to do workshops and talks all over the world is probably my favorite thing that I'm able to do. And my clicker's being funny. There we go. And I just wanted to show you guys that boarding pass collection is getting a little out of hand. And yes, anytime I view my boarding pass collection, I play triumphant music. So this is where I get into how I got started. The reason I got into photography was actually an accident. I didn't really mean to pick up a camera. I was in visual effects, motion graphics, post-production for a long time. And I got really burnt out on that, and I didn't feel like an artist because I just felt like I was working for clients, 80-hour weeks, and just never taking a vacation. So when I decided to leave that and I wanted to travel, I wanted to also take photos. I just wanted to bring a camera. And when I picked up a camera, I got really excited again. I felt like an artist. I finally felt like this was not what I intended to do, but this is something that I wanted to do. So I had an idea. I said, let's travel and let's take photos of beautiful locations and let's see what happens. And I had a friend tell me who, well, I would say that he's a former friend. He's not my friend anymore. I told him what I wanted to do. I want to travel the world, and I want to take beautiful photos of beautiful locations, and I want to build a business out of this. And he said, that's impossible. Everything's already been done before. Everything's been photographed before. There's no way you can succeed. And I'm like, I think that's horrible advice, actually. I think especially when you're getting started, that's very discouraging. I thought, well, how about if we do things in a different way? And that's the secret of photography that we're going to talk about, is doing things in a different way, finding your own path and creating your own style. So I wanted to do that. But it started with the simple idea of, hey, we haven't taken a vacation in 10 or 12 years because we've been so busy. Let's start utilizing the ability of travel. So let's take Rome, for example. Can you guys think of anything that's iconic in Rome, any piece of architecture, anything come to mind? The Vatican, good. So we have the Colosseum, yeah. Rome has some beautiful areas. So I started thinking about these locations. We have Rome, the Colosseum. So I got up really early, started photographing things, and then somebody said, Vatican. So the Vatican's really beautiful, but there's all these views, the bridges of Rome, that are incredible. And also, my favorite thing about shooting from bridges, nobody can get in front of you doing a selfie. And if they do, you could just, you had to think about that for a second, because there's the water. They could accidentally, if you just nudge them a little bit, they could, I don't know. I'm not suggesting it. So what I do after I figured out the iconic locations getting started is I'd start moving around and look for other elements that I can here. And this is really nice. If you guys go to Rome, this is Ponte Umberto is the bridge that we're standing on. This is the Bridge of Angels, Ponte St. Angelo, Castle St. Angelo behind the tree, and the Vatican in the background. So it becomes very iconic of Rome. But what about other cities? What about, let's say, Paris? Can you guys think of anything possibly iconic in Paris? Anything? I know. I know. Oh, man. They have one in Vegas, too, so we don't actually have to go to Paris anymore. Paris is interesting for me because when I first started visiting Paris years and years ago, it was before I really had a mobile global data plan and GPS. So I was still using a paper map. And I'd never been to the city, so I decided before I was going to go right to the Eiffel Tower, I'd climb the largest building, not physically climb it, that's not what I meant. I actually took the elevator just to specify, to the Tower Montparnasse to get the view of the city and to get the Eiffel Tower. Because I thought, this is going to give me a visual overlook of the city so that when I actually scout everything, I can know where everything is. But then I started thinking, I don't just want to go photograph the Eiffel Tower. I want it to be sort of symbolic of the old and new. Because I feel like the Eiffel Tower is not the most interesting thing about Paris. It's a history just like Rome. So I found out that during the summer, you can climb, and again, you can take the stairs, not actually climb. Or you probably could, but you get in trouble. And you can see the old gargoyles of Notre Dame. And I thought this was a really neat idea. I wanted this juxtaposition of the old sentinels of the city, these old gargoyles that have been there throughout history, looking over the old part of the city, and then the new Eiffel Tower. So those are cities, though. Well, what about countries? And this is where it gets really fun for me. So countries, like Iceland, representing an entire country rather than a city. Well, what comes to mind? And bear in mind, 7 years ago when I was visiting Iceland, it wasn't as popular today. What comes to mind with Iceland? The aurora. Somebody said ice. Ice, definitely. Iceland. Yeah, we're starting. Yeah, see, some of you guys actually know specific locations. But what Iceland actually has the most of is waterfalls. Some of the most beautiful and most powerful waterfalls in Europe are in Iceland. And we start to represent these. So Iceland, thankfully, doesn't have an Eiffel Tower or a Colosseum yet. But this is the equivalent for the people visiting. Alderfoss is sort of like the Colosseum. Or if we go even further to actual ice in Iceland, Jökulsárlón. Jökulsárlón is another big attraction. And this is a very famous area if you haven't been to. Jökulsárlón is the glacier lagoon. It's one of the first places that people visit in Iceland. And if you've seen those photos of the ice on the beach, this is right next to that. So essentially, this is a channel that goes in and out of the ocean. So basically, at low tide, as it's going out, all of this ice goes out into the ocean and it washes back up on the beach. And it repeats this every day. So every single day, the ice is different. But it's really fun. So it represents Iceland, could be anywhere in Iceland, but you can definitely feel how it's a cold, northern, almost Arctic destination. What about Japan? Okay. Awesome season. Okay, good. For Sakura, yeah, okay, good. But before that, mountains, Mount Fuji, good. Bamboo forest. Do you guys know this location? It's amazing. It's a beautiful, one of the longest bamboo forests, largest bamboo forests in the world. And if you get here in the morning by yourself, you can be there and you're just going to have locals. Locals are going to be around walking their dogs, jogging, exercising, and things like that. And if it's a windy morning, around 7:30, the sun's going to come up. You're going to start to see it illuminate in the back. And if you're quiet and it's windy, you just hear the bamboo stalks moving. So Japan, for me, was this sort of harmony and serenity in the landscape and everything around it. And of course, then we get into seasonal elements, like the cherry blossoms and the old castles. Now, this is Osaka Castle. It was recently rebuilt. In Japanese history, when the feudal lords and the shogun would come and take over a city, they'd burn everything down. And they also have every natural disaster. So most of the castles have either been destroyed in fires or earthquakes or old conquering. So this is relatively new build, but what they've done in Japan with the new build is maintain the classic architecture. Around cherry blossom season, I'll be in this location in a week and a half, actually. Again, it's really beautiful because they'll do lighting events with the cherry blossoms. So now we're starting to get into seasonal variations as well as representing locations. But it all really comes down to, if I can trigger this, choosing the right moments in time. So this is really where it gets into when we shoot these locations. We've already established where, the locations we want to go. But what about when? When do we pick these locations? And it's fun for photography because I like to say this is kind of a beautiful location. I'm not sure. Santorini. So, okay, number one, find beautiful location. Done. We have that. What's next? Choose the right moment to shoot it. So here's actually a time lapse. So I set up about 4 hours early here in Santorini. Don't feel bad for me being in Greece 4 hours early. Set this up. What happens is the light's going to transition into a sunset. And from sunset, something very special is going to happen. And what's going to happen is the blue hour is going to start. And that's when the artificial lights from the city come on. So it's a completely different feel to the scene. So we've gone from a late afternoon, golden light on the city or on the little town itself, the sunset with the sky, and then this nice harmony of light. So that's 4 hours of time. Then I have to choose one frame from that. So 4 hours to choose one shot, which isn't really that bad. So what I've picked is a blue hour here, and I'm going to explain how the blue hour works. I've also gotten rid of, you guys noticed there's quite a few people moving around there. I definitely got rid of the people. But that was a sunset to a night, so transition from day to night. Well, what about the opposite? This is a transition from morning. This is the day after a typhoon in Hong Kong, and this is getting up very early for the AM blue hour and waiting for the transition. So basically everything's going to change, and as it changes, the lights are going to turn off in the city. You can see it was a crazy turbulent day after the typhoons. I've learned to wait. If there's typhoons incoming, I get excited because you get this spectacular weather. So now, after that happens, all those lights go away, then the sun starts to come up. So this is going to be the sort of final part of the presentation when I get into blending time together. So sometimes one moment for me isn't enough. It actually comes down to a few moments in time. So what you're seeing here is a compression of time together. You're seeing the vivid part of the sunrise and the lights from the buildings. So this is what we're going to start getting into. But in order to do that, we have to understand the functional times for photography in general. And it seems really interesting in the beginning because most of what I do and most of what landscape photographers shoot are around certain times of the day. And the first time of day is the golden hour. Golden hour is often overlooked, but it's really important because it's not a sunrise or a sunset. A golden hour happens just after sunrise or just before sunset. Doesn't necessarily have to be an hour, but what happens is the sun, oh wow, that wasn't supposed to happen. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so basically what happens is the sun is low enough in the sky and it filters the light. So usually here in Dubai, if you guys have a clear day, even when the sun gets down very low, you can actually see the sun. It's really neat here in this part of the world to actually look at the sun and watch that orangish red ball hit the sea. It's really interesting. But in most places, if you look at the sun, you have to shield your eyes. So the golden hour is really cool. Just before it hits the edge of the mountains or the edge of the horizon, it starts to get a filtered light effect. The atmosphere in the horizon filters it and gives it a golden quality of light. The other thing that's really important about the gold hour, as opposed to a sunrise or sunset, with this shot, for example, the light streaming in on the left side and illuminating everything on the right. If I would have waited for the sun to set all the way, then I would have no light. The light would be completely gone. The sky might look a little bit nice, but there'd be no light, and light is the essence of photography. So this is Valençol in southern France. This is the first 90 seconds of the morning. Another note about this location, I have to tell you guys, it is the best smelling photography destination on the planet. It's amazing, actually. I wish everywhere smelled like this. Rome, under the bridge, not so much, not so much. This is the first 90 seconds of light. And I went there years ago, and I was looking at a lot of photos, and I was like, you know, that's a beautiful sky in the photo that I saw, but I don't like there's no light on the foreground. So we just waited, and it's neat because it's a plateau, and it's up. There's a little bit of elevation, so it's almost flat. So as soon as that sun comes above that horizon, there's nothing really getting in its way to cast these light rays. And the first 60 to 90 seconds of that light just had these beautiful highlights along the top of the lavender. After about 90 seconds, it was time to pack it up and take a nap after butchering the French language trying to order coffee and food. I've learned something about France, too. It doesn't matter how well you try to pronounce something, they will always tell you you're pronouncing it wrong. They're very, very good about that. Getting back to Japan, I did hear somebody say Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji is very precious to the Japanese. It's symbolic of a lot of things in their culture and in their nature. So this is sort of a culmination of all the light coming together. So usually the golden hour, after the golden hour in the morning, the light starts to get harsh. But in this case, what I've done is I've waited for the sun to come up enough to illuminate everything. So a little before this, Mount Fuji was illuminated, but the Terada Pagoda didn't have much light on it, and the cherry blossoms weren't lit. So I had to wait probably 2 hours after sunrise, which is pushing it a little bit for the golden hour, just to get the harmony of light. And harmony is actually a really big term in Japan, very important. So a harmony of light. Now, sunrise and sunset, very, very important time for photographers in general. Now, raise your hand if you hate sunsets. Nobody, right? What about sunrises? Yeah, see, what's the biggest difference between a sunrise and sunset? Yeah, sunset is a much more reasonable time of day. Sunrise is really tough. You have to get up early. So what we're usually doing in landscape photography is reversing our sleeping schedule. So we'll get up first for sunrise really early, and then we'll sleep the middle of the day, stay up for sunset, and stay up all night, shoot sunrise, and go back to sleep, rather than having to get up early. It's really hard to reverse yourself out of that, but it gives you the ability to not have to wake up early, which is kind of nice, to wake up in the afternoon. So, little useful trick, and but it's hard. It actually is really difficult. Now, it's really interesting. So we find these beautiful locations, and we're always hoping for this. Every time I come to Dubai, too, and there's clouds, I'm always hoping for this. We're all always hoping for a beautiful sunset. And it doesn't matter what we're photographing, whether it's cityscape, landscape, or even if we're doing some street photography and we happen to have a background. Those colors, the way that the light hits the clouds, the light refracts off objects, that's the best thing, best possible result we can get in these locations. And it's something that I wait for, too. The other nice thing that I like to do is shoot into the sun. And so this is a sunset. And again, the reason that I've waited or shot instead of waiting for it to dip below the horizon is I'm still getting the light on the town itself, and I'm still getting the light and colors in the sky. So it's something really beautiful. And sunrise and sunset can give you some really special results. So this is another town. The other one was Vernazza. This is Rio Maggiore. These are really beautiful towns, very famous now in Italy. And you can see this is what I was talking about of the sun. It's so low in the sky we can almost look at it. So if you want to be able to capture the globe of the sun, or the entirety of the sun's true shape, then you have to wait to the bottom of the golden hour. And you can do that here too, when you can actually see the sun. But the nice thing here is the sun's still powerful enough to give a little bit of light to the foreground, a little bit of light here to the side of the beautiful red building. And you can see that it's late enough where there are some light on in the city as well. Sunrise and sunset is cool. Now here's an example of a couple things. One, this is before the sun actually came up from the horizon. So if the sun's below the horizon, there's not that much light in the foreground, just a little bit of ambient light. In that case, we can use as reflectivity. So the sky, you can see, reflects in the water, and actually some of the skylight reflects in the beach as well. So it gives more of an illusion of ambient light. This is a really interesting location that's in Dunedin, in the South Island of New Zealand. It's a beach called St. Clair's Beach, and this was shot in 2011 or 2012, and there were all of these pylons here. But what really attracted me to the shot, did you guys see that little island right in the center there? It was just fascinating to me, like these pylons with this little island in the center, and I had no idea. This is a surf beach, and the waves are coming in, and most of these pylons are gone today. I have no idea what they were trying to build. I have a feeling that the Kiwis were like, let's get out to that island, let's build a thing, and then they gave up. Like, that was it. They're like, all right, we're not going to do it. So it's a really interesting location, and when I was photographing this location, it was funny because I was set up, this was the first morning, and all these people kept walking by. People were jogging with their dogs, or people were just walking on the beach, and they're like, hey, mate, what are you photographing? Like, this, the pylons. They're like, why? And I'm like, well, it's kind of beautiful with the water and everything. They're like, all right, and they just kind of leave. A bunch of people, they're like, why would you be here photographing this? I'm trying to explain it. That's something very special. Sunrise and sunset, too. This is Mesa Arch. I was just there last year. And again, shooting into the sun. So this is kind of a fun thing that we can all do with the sun. You saw before was the globe of the sun, low on the horizon. Anytime the sun hits an edge, right? That's the edge of a cloud, that's the edge of a mountain, the edge of anything. And you can see it's just coming off the horizon. If you change your f-stop and bring it up above f8, f11 into 13, 16, or 22, you get this definitive starburst effect, which is really nice. Now, when I was looking at photos and researching Mesa Arch, I was convinced that people just made the arch red. I was like, there's no way it could actually light up, but it actually does. For like 15 minutes, that whole arch turns completely red. It's really amazing. But what I've really done, and I've really studied with photography over the years, is the blue hour. And the blue hour is my favorite time of day because it's a harmony of natural and artificial light together. The blue hour is cool. Now here in Dubai, we actually call it the gray hour with the blue 8 minutes. You might get a blue 10 minutes if you're lucky. So the hour is relative to your geographic location on the globe, right? So if summer in Sweden, it's always blue hour. It never really gets full dark. And that's the key to these shots, is really finding that right balance between natural and artificial light. Natural light still coming from the sky. Because there's still natural light in the sky, you can see the illumination of the trees, you can see the illumination of the rocks, and different things like that. But you also, since there's not much light in the sky, you get the beautiful harmony of the artificial lights together. So the blue hour is a way to marry together both natural and artificial light. And it's one of my favorite times to photograph. I love it. But again, I like the late blue hour better than the early blue hour, because the early blue hour happens before the super early sunrise. So you have to really pick and choose which one's here. But this is, again, I love using these old Italian villages as an example. And in Japan, this was a nice example too. This is the Gion district of Kyoto. This is the Yasaka Shrine. And you can see what's interesting about this is it's almost lit by a singular light source. You see that lamp on the right. Basically a yellow light illuminating all of these other objects. So I had to really go in and separate some of the colors so it wasn't all yellow. But what's really cool about the blue hour is we have a lot of warm lighting in Europe and Japan, all over the world, these warm lights. And when you can put it against a blue background, it creates a complementary color. So you have this beautiful isolation of the yellows and a beautiful isolation of the sky. And it's a really fun time to shoot because you can also have these places all to yourself. Hallstatt in Austria, beautiful little town. Now I did some research about Hallstatt. About 600 years ago, there was this guy there, and he prophesized that there would be photographers someday, and he'd build this village in a way that would attract people to photograph it. I'm lying, obviously. But when you go here and you actually go around this little corner and you look at this town, you feel like it's built for a camera, like the way that it's laid out, everything. And again, it's nice, but in the mountains, sunrise and sunset is very difficult. I explained like on a plateau, right? It's flat, everything's flat. Here in Dubai, as soon as the sun comes up, if it's not too dusty, you're getting illumination. But if you're in the mountains, it takes a while for the sun to come up. And then the sun's hitting everything at harsh angles, and there's different things happening, shadows. So here too, when the sun comes up, it has to get past the mountains. But in the blue hour, I'm still able to get that harmony, still able to see some color in the mountains and all of these colors in the town, all of the beautiful Austrian architecture that comes with it, but also utilizing that ambient light so that it still illuminates all of these little details that are around, even the greens in the trees. Blue hour also gives you the ability to capture really unique elements. This is Singapore. This is Singapore's laser show. My first visit to Singapore, this was my challenge to myself back in 2011, was to capture this, to figure out how to capture the laser show. And I tried a few times, and I was eventually able to capture it. Singapore's laser show was my favorite laser show until I saw the Burj Khalifa while I was here. Have you guys all gone to see that laser show? Incredible. I mean, it's so intense when you're at ground level. It's on a different level. So now Singapore is the second best laser show. It used to be the best. But this is really fun. So I was able to get all of that light from the city, some nice blue color in the sky, and also the lasers. And speaking of Dubai, I've been trying to capture fog in Dubai. I've been visiting Dubai since 2010. I've been coming here. And this was my first experience with the Dubai fog, where I was at level 43, and you guys know level, 42nd, 43rd floor is like the basement in Dubai. Like you might as well be on, -2. And I realized that on this morning that I had set up and there was fog, I wasn't high enough. I was actually in it. But that's cool because it gave an environmental effect. So I really, really liked this environmental effect. It feels like Blade Runner. You see, like the fog, the light's actually illuminating parts of the fog. Everything's kind of swirling around. And it was a cool thing. You know, I was happy. I was like, okay, well, you know, that was close. Not exactly what I wanted, but at least it was close. This is Tiger's Nest in Bhutan. Have some of you guys been to Bhutan? Okay, so you've hiked it. Amazing place, right? A beautiful location. The reason I went to Bhutan initially, and I've been 4 times since to visit different parts of the country, I was invited by the royal family to film the Tour of the Dragon. And if you're not familiar with the Tour of the Dragon, it is the longest one-day mountain bike race in the world. These guys essentially start at 2 a.m. the previous day, and they have midnight till midnight the next day to travel the entirety of the country, up and down every single mountain. They don't even close traffic. These guys are crazy. So we're following them around, filming that, getting to know the royal family. It was really fun. And we had one day at the end of the trip back in Paro, and we decided to hike up so I could get a photo of Tiger's Nest and see it. Now, what was interesting is we got to the top in the afternoon, and I was really excited. I'm like, this is so beautiful. There was some fog coming in. You see just below that. And it was coming in and out of the fog. And I just had this idea. I'm like, you know, what's this going to look like at sunset? And what is it going to look like at blue hour? And I'd done some research for Bhutan. If you search Bhutan, this is the first thing that comes up. I didn't see any nighttime images. So I asked my guide, Yonten, who's a really good friend of mine now. I said, Yonten, how long have you been a guide? 20 years. Like, wow, it's a long time. So you've been up here how many times then? I don't know, thousands of times. Thousands of times I've been up here with people. Okay. So can we stay for sunset? Sure. Okay, do they light this up at night? Do they have electricity? He's like, I don't know. I have no idea. And I'm like, well, wait, you've been up here thousands of times and you're telling me you have no idea if they light this up at night. He's like, well, no, nobody's ever asked to stay up here that long. I was like, really? Okay, well, can we stay? Sure, let's stay. So we're going to stay. So we waited a little bit longer, and eventually some monks walked by, and they were doing some restoration. So they had hiked down, and they had the 2 buckets of paint, and they were coming across. And I walked up to them, and I kind of just walked up, and I was like, hey, guys, how are you? Pretty good. So you live here, right? Uh-huh, yeah, we live here. And you have electricity. And they're like, yeah, we live here. Of course we have electricity. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to continue with these dumb questions. That means there's lights, right? And they're like, yes, we have electricity, we have lighting. And then they just kind of left. Like, thanks, guys. So we waited, and we were able to capture this with the blue hour during the sunset, getting all of the color. So I was really happy, and I just thought, you know what, I captured something really nice. And we were working with the royal family and the tourism board. And we got back the next morning, went and had a meeting in Paro with the tourism board. And they looked at this photo, and they told me, they're like, I've never seen this lit up before. I've never seen a photo of this. I didn't even know that they lit this up. I'm like, guys, you live here, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, and you don't know? How can you not see it? Well, we've never really paid attention to it. I was like, so you have no photos of this at night or blue hour? No, we don't. You know? So I was like, well, that's great. So they were able to use it in their advertising. And the Prince of Bhutan saw it, and he says, this is the most beautiful photo I've ever seen of Tiger's Nest. Can we hang it in the palace? And I said, yeah, you know, of course you can hang it in the palace. And since then, I've been trying to get him to do a selfie with it. But his social media guy keeps like knocking it down, because he's like, yeah, I'll get to it. The social media guy's like, no, it's not going to happen. We have very strict policy for selfies and the royal family. They're very nice. So I think it's hanging in the royal palace, and it taught me something very important. Because in this presentation, I'm going to go further and further with how I've developed these styles of photography. But here, I don't think I did anything that extraordinary. You know, the hike is difficult, but anybody can do it. The positioning, everything, getting everything focused, sure. But staying a little bit later for blue hour, and then I have a unique shot that hasn't been captured before in this country with the #1 destination, it taught me something. It's like, okay, just staying a little bit longer, challenging myself just a little bit can maybe get me something completely unique. So it made me think a lot about that. So sometimes it's not about going completely out of your way. It's just about staying a little bit longer. And another thing that I want to get into is watching the weather. This is so important to me, even as much important as the location itself. The weather plays such a huge role in my photography. Everything that I've shown you so far has some sort of sky element, has clouds, some sort of color, some sort of turbulence or texture in the sky. I like to call it sky drama. And I just asked people, is there sky drama today? It's like, yes, okay, we're going to shoot if there's sky drama. This was one of my first locations that I traveled to when I was getting into photography. This is Meteora in central Greece. This is shot in the middle of the day. Now, I haven't shown you any middle of the day shots yet. I've been talking about the sunrises and sunsets. I had 4 days. This was in 2010. We were hurting financially. We had lost our house in the housing crisis, filed bankruptcy. Everything that we did was stretching limits of what we were able to do at this point. Or even for this trip, I ate bread for 4 days just to be here. I only had 4 days we could spend, maximizing the budget. And every single day I was disappointed. It was rainy, or it was overcast, it was everything. And on the last day, I woke up and it was pouring rain, completely hazy. I was looking outside. I couldn't even see the tops of the mountains. And honestly, I was very depressed. We've come all the way here, and I don't have a single portfolio image that I can use. And then something interesting happened. At about 2 o'clock, the rain started to clear, and I started to see this mist, this fog sort of rolling through, and I saw the tops of the mountains. So I called a taxi. Yes, you can actually call a taxi to take you to the top of here. And I had him take me to the top, and I was in the fog, and I'm like, no, take me back down. And he freaked out, and he's like, thought I didn't want to pay him. So I had to call his boss and say, no, I'm going to pay him. I just need him to take me halfway down. Figured that out, got to this position, and what we started to see was the fog was rolling through the valley. So it was just fingers of fog going through these mountains and through the valley. And it taught me something interesting, too, was always be ready. So very early in my photography and landscape photography career, I thought, if it's raining, I'm not going to get anything. Now when it's raining, I'm excited. Like I see things, I'm like, wow, well, it could change, it could shift. Like the typhoons in Hong Kong or any part of East Asia too. After the typhoon, the most beautiful colors come in. If you've ever had a thunderstorm here and then you see the sky turn red, it's because of all that moisture. So now I always watch the weather, and I'm always anticipating what might happen. And it's interesting too, because fog, not just here in Dubog, fog is so fascinating for me as a photographer. I love fog and when you can get above it. And Tuscany is one of those locations where it's already so beautiful, but with all of these hills and rolling valleys and different things like that, when you get this beautiful fog, it's something special. And I knew I wanted to capture this. So we extended. I'd been to Tuscany a couple times and never captured the fog. So we decided to stay an extra few days. We stayed 12 days here in the Valdorcia region. And every single morning for 8 mornings, I woke up at about 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning, went outside, drove the car around, went up to a high vantage point, set up my camera in the dark because it was cloudy, it was near a new moon, and I'd shoot. And I'd turn the ISO up, it's not a high quality photo, but I'd shoot just so I could see in the dark. And if there was fog, I'd chase it all around, drive around, chase the fog, try to capture it and everything. But every morning it kept getting past me or wasn't in the right position. And then on the 8th morning, I knew where I wanted to be. I was waiting for it. I was tracking it. It moved a little bit each day. And on the 8th morning, I finally got the shot that I wanted. On the 9th morning, I slept all day. All day. I didn't even get up. And I hope the fog wasn't better that day. You guys know that feeling when you keep yourself awake, because what if it's going to be beautiful? What if it's going to be amazing? I don't want to know. I just know that 8 mornings was good. That stretched to my limit. So that was 8 days. I had multiple trips, but I'd say 8 days for one shot. And what's interesting about weather and locations in general, like this is a really fun spot to shoot in Venice if you guys go. This is the Ponte Accademia, the Accademia Bridge. It's pretty much easy to tell what that means. Now, I've visited this place for 4 consecutive years at the same time of year because I was already usually in Italy around that time. Around September and October, the sun rises dead center of the shot. And my vision, I had this idea for the shot. I wanted the globe of the sun with a beautiful sunrise. That's what I wanted. I wanted the sun plus the clouds. As photographers, we ask for impossible things. We want the sun, we want the clouds, but we need all the lights to be on. A unicorn needs to be there. UFOs need to land. We're very unrealistic about all the things that we want, but that's what I wanted. And I remember the 4th year, it was clear. It was a clear sky, so as I got the sun, I was like, but it's not what I wanted. There's no texture or drama in the sky. So that night, before we left the next day, it's like, well, let's just go out and shoot the blue hour for fun. We're here, we're staying very close. And we started to capture this little lightning storm. Like you see the little lightning on the top. And when I finally went back through these images, I edited it, and I was like, that's kind of nice. I've never really tried to photograph lightning before, but it adds a little element to it. And I was like, I think that this is much more interesting than the sun just rising in the center of the frame. It's something a little bit more unique. And how many of you guys use Reddit? Some of you guys know Reddit, right? What happens when things go on Reddit? They're all perfect, nice comments, right? Like everybody on Reddit's really polite, like YouTube comments. This got on Reddit, and thousands of people were accusing me of photoshopping lightning. They were like, oh, it must be nice to just Photoshop whatever you want into a scene. So I usually don't argue on Reddit, but I'm like, guys, if I was going to Photoshop lightning into a scene, I'd do it some big lightning. It would be big bolts if I was going to do that. This is not Photoshopped. I'm just using that as an example. It made me so frustrated. I was like, guys, I would have just put big lightning bolts right through the center of the frame. So after I kind of learned this was really interesting. Last year, I was leading a photo tour in Italy. And this is Piazzale Michelangelo. You can shoot Florence. And this thunderstorm started rolling in. And this is a very public location. A lot of people go to shoot there, and it's really cool. So we're there. My group's set up. We're all set up in the city. And lightning starts to strike, and the thunder happens, like lightning, thunder. People are like, ooh, lightning, thunder, ah. And it was just striking over and over again. So I was telling everybody, okay, let's lock the shutter down on the camera. So what I did is I just locked the shutter down, left it in aperture priority mode, and as the blue hours started happening, they were like 10, 15-second exposures back to back to back to back to back. So eventually, I was able to catch some of this lightning in the frame. And I grew up in the tropics, too. Like, I know the danger of very powerful electrical storms. And I'm feeling the pressure drop and everything moving in, and it's nighttime, but everybody's still there, like thousands of people going, ooh, and ah, and like selfies. And I'm like, guys, we need to get out of here now. And so we do. So by the time we're driving away, those oohs and ahs turned into screams of, oh, no, and like lightning and everything, almost like hail on everybody. But again, it's funny. So it taught me that even if there's a thunderstorm, I need to be out shooting. And before, the rain would keep me away. Now I get excited. What if this happens? What if I'm able to get these lightning strike? Because in places where you can stand in the same location, you can capture the same style of shot, these are the kind of things that make it unique. Something that nature provides is what makes it unique. The composition is nice, but it's not something that somebody could not repeat. Little variations obviously make a big difference. And it leads me to this. You guys know where this is, right? Okay. Now, I mentioned being on the 43rd floor, level 43. This is the 42nd, so I'm sub-basement at this point of the Shangri-La on their viewing deck. I am way below down. I'm like in a secret underground base here in Dubai. You always look out at the buildings and they tower above. I was able to capture the fog for a few reasons. The main reason that I think I was able to finally capture the fog was because I gave up. Because I'd travel here, I've been visiting maybe twice a year for 7 years or so. And every time I'd get here, I'd arrive on Wednesday, and my friends would say, the fog was so amazing on Tuesday. Great, well, I'm here for a week. It'll be good. And I'd leave on a Thursday, and then they'd tell me Friday was the best fog. And so this kept happening, like year after year. So everybody here was like, oh, you're our good luck charm. As long as you leave, the fog will be here. And I'm like, well, that doesn't work for me. I'm kind of like reverse good luck charm. So my wife and I, 2 years ago, in March, were in Bhutan. But we spent a month in Bhutan, going further and further east. And we went to Mongar, Trashiang, Trashianse, and into the countryside of Bhutan, staying in farm homes, which is really lovely. Staying with locals, staying with families. And we were in the Popchika Valley, and it's just a fun thing to say, Popchika. The Popchika Valley, and it's -2 degrees when we wake up, and there's no warm water, and they're just trying to like wash up in the morning, and the pipes are frozen, and everything's ice, and the bathroom facilities are outside. And I had to book the hotel in Dubai because we were using it as transit for 4 or 5 days. And that was a good point where I said, hey, Naomi, is it okay if we stay at a 5-star, a little bit of comfort? And after no running water for a few days and everything, she's like, yeah, go ahead. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stay at the Shangri-La, spend a little extra money. It's more than I usually spend. And just in case there's fog, but there's probably not going to be fog in March, just in case I'll be there. So in the first morning, it was so foggy that I was in the fog again and nothing. Because I was like, this is too low. There's no chance. The next morning, it looked like this. Fog coming through the city. And come to find out, clouds and fog are really rare in Dubai. So this is about once in 7 years where you get this kind of sunrise and the fog. So 7 years, multiple trips, all this trial, and the time that I just gave up and said is never going to happen, it actually happened. The other interesting thing about this shot is you think on a morning like this, it would be a really busy shooting location. We were the only ones there. And everybody said, afterwards, they were on different towers, they said, I bet it was so busy you couldn't shoot. And I'm like, well, do you really want the answer for that? They're like, oh no, I just assumed it's going to be so busy with weather like that. And I'm like, no, it was just us. So it was really lucky. But these events are really fun, and this is all, it's blue hour, weather, sunrise. This basically puts all of this together into a single moment. Getting the color of the sky, the beautiful light on the side of the Burj Khalifa, the fog. This is just a crazy thing to me that the fog is illuminated from within. We get all this color in this fog. It only happens here. It's a unique thing to the city. Really, really beautiful, unique thing. Click. There we go. So all of this culminates, and this is where it starts to get really fun. Talked about the different times of day. Sunrise, sunset, blue hour, the absurdity of how early sunrises are. All of this comes down to something that I've been developing over the last series of years, and that's blending moments in time together. So essentially what you're seeing here is you're seeing the blue hour in the Vatican and the sunset behind it. So about 15 to 20 minutes encapsulated in a single moment. Now it's interesting because if we think about beautiful locations, now I'm just going to stand closer. If we think about beautiful locations like Greece, for example, like say you go to Greece and you're thinking about something and you're there and you're having an experience. When you see a sunset, you're going to see the sun go down. You're going to see the sun change colors. Then the sky is going to transition. The pinks are going to hit the clouds. Later, the lights are going to come on in the city. And all of this is going to happen. When you're describing a sunset to somebody, are you describing it as a single image or a single moment in time? No, you're remembering it as a sequence and you're describing it as a sequence. So if we're talking about time-lapse or we're talking about video, we have the ability to utilize time because we're showing the progression of it, just like our minds work. So my idea was, if I leave the camera in the same place, and this is really the main key to being able to do this, is there a way that I can use the best of the lighting to create the moment that I want to represent the entire memory of an event? When the sun just peaked below the horizon, when the clouds started turning pink, and when the lights turned on in the city itself. So that's sort of how that concept was born. And here, I'll have a before and after we take a little break later that's going to show this, but this also came into play in Japan. If you guys visit Japan, it's a beautiful country, but the skies there, they're always a little pale blue, and it's not because of pollution or anything, it's just the way they are positioned on the globe. You end up with really soft blue skies, very few puffy clouds or epic sunsets or sunrises, just soft. So here, this sky is what drew my attention to the shot, but at the time that I shot the sky, the lights of the castle weren't on, the lights of the cherry blossoms weren't on. So I waited another 15 minutes, all the lights came on, and then with simple masking, I was able to put it together. So encapsulating about 15 minutes of time. Now this really played a huge role, and how I started to really experiment with this was when I was shooting Venice. And what really led me to this were the gondola. Now obviously we have a few things intact that you guys have seen now, a couple things. Skies in a controlled, just right past sunset, right around sunset, a little bit later for the buildings and the lights. But what I really wanted to capture was the gondola. Has anybody been to Venice recently? Okay. I was lucky when I was shooting Venice for shots like this, it was before the invention of the selfie stick. The selfie stick now is crazy. And you know what else is funny? Like, if you're shooting this, people are shooting with their iPhones and everything, which is okay, because you know how we shoot it with our iPhones? It's like this, right? Or it's a selfie like this. How come iPads are up here? You guys notice that? Yeah, so people will stand up in these things holding up an iPad. So it really ruins your photo when you're trying to get this essence of Venice, and there's a lady in a Hello Kitty t-shirt holding up her iPad. So this is very frustrating. So I had the moments in time idea, and then what I did is after I shot everything, I changed my camera settings. So obviously if I was shooting at the blue hour, I was shooting at f8, let's say low ISO, it's probably going to be like an 8-second exposure. That's not going to work for the boats. So what I'll do is I'll change my camera settings, f2.8, I'll make sure it's a fast shutter speed, like 1/160 or 1/1 or 250, so that I can capture all of these boats. So that's where that really sort of came into play. What can I control? Well, I can control the gondola by putting the right ones in the scene and waiting for the right ones to be in the shot. And then I can anticipate the sky and all the other elements. So blending time wasn't just to encapsulate memories, it also gives me the ability to control certain elements that I feel need to be represented in the shot, especially making sure there's no selfie sticks in the shot. Greece, I'm going to have a couple examples of this location and before and afters. Same thing. So we've seen this beautiful color and light that's in the city or the town, and we see the beautiful light of the sunset. So again, blending time. Now this doesn't just work in those environments. This is also something that I've been doing everywhere, in cityscapes and seascapes. So this one takes it a little bit further. This combines long exposure. So this is a 30-second exposure. This is the skyline of Manhattan. If you guys want to know this location, this is on the Brooklyn side. This is called Brooklyn Bridge Pylons. It's a little bit to the left of the selfie spot. And when you guys go there, you'll know what I mean, because you'll see a bunch of people doing selfies. Just walk a little bit further, you'll come along this location. So I had a neutral density filter, 10-stop neutral density filter, and I was shooting 30-second exposures. So I got a really nice sort of streaky cloud kind of leading line thing happening. And then I waited a little bit longer for the Manhattan skyline to come on and put it all together. So it gave me this sort of super moment. And this shot is being used in advertising all over New York City because it's a really beautiful spot. And these pylons are also quite interesting to me because they're not used for anything. I don't know what they were used for, but it's become a really fun place to photograph. So you guys have a chance to go to New York and spend some time in Brooklyn. I highly recommend shooting here. It's really, really cool. And I say cool literally because it turned out when I was photographing this last March, it turned out to be the coldest destination I've ever been on the planet. And you guys saw shots from Iceland? That is nothing like negative 12 degrees Celsius in New York with the wind chill. I thought we were going to die. I thought it was impossible for anything to be that cold. So now I think after being in New York in the harsh winter, and you see with we have polar vortexes and nor'easters, I feel like I'm ready for Arctic after New York. It's really weird. So blending moments of time culminates into a harmony of light. That's really it. It's a harmony of light. And I love using examples of Japan. I've shown you one version of this. I've shot there in order to get the shots that I like of this location. It was the better part of 2 years. 3 really, I don't count the first year because I went there to scout it and I learned that these cherry blossoms don't actually bloom until much later than everything else. So I found the location and I was ready for it, but I knew I had to come back the next season. Came back the next season, the weather was horrible. So with cherry blossoms, if you're going to photograph the cherry blossoms, you have to understand that in a perfect scenario, they'll bloom for about 7 days. That means they'll open, hopefully evenly along the tree. And then they'll stay open anywhere between 7 and 10 days, and then start to fall for another 7 days. So you can have basically 3 weeks of these beautiful cherry blossom flowers. But their biggest enemy is the weather. So sometimes, a couple years ago actually in Tokyo, it's the sakura, they call it. They had this term, they called it the sakura apocalypse. Because basically what happened is as soon as the cherry blossoms bloomed, they had a wind and ice storm in Tokyo, and it knocked out all the cherry blossoms. And the Japanese people were so sad about this, so sad. So the same thing happened here. We got out here and we booked a few days, and a windstorm came in and knocked down all the cherries. So we had to plan again the next year. Went back the next year, shot sunrise and sunset. That's when I talked about reversing the sleeping schedule. Sunrise and sunset for 3 mornings, so I ended up with 6 versions of this shot. And then the next day a storm came in, blew out all the cherry blossoms. So we only had 3 functional days. But out of that, I ended up really liking this shot because it has a lot of different light in the scene. The other thing is that's really interesting, this could have gone really bad because when I was set up, there were so many clouds that they cover Mount Fuji. They call Mount Fuji the cloud magnet because if there's one tiny little puffy cloud in an otherwise blue sky, that cloud is going to stick to Mount Fuji. This is going to happen, and it's going to sit there the whole time, and the mountain's going to create its own climate, and you're going to like, please move, cloud, please move. So I had like this 5-minute window where the sky opened up, the sunset was happening, so Fuji is illuminated from the right side, the Terada Pagoda is illuminated from the left, the cherry blossoms are kind of illuminated from the bottom left and underneath, and the town of Fujiyoshida in the background is illuminated from within. So it's all of this light sort of swirling together to create this image. And it's a really fun thing to put together. So I'm always looking for this light. One of my really good friends works for Pixar. You guys know Pixar? They make all the movies? Yeah. He's a lighting technical director. So he's the one who sets up all the lighting for the scenes. He hates this shot. It drives him crazy because there's so many light sources that are impossible. Because I've manufactured this light, basically, manufactured these sources. So he says, it drives me crazy because there's light coming from everywhere. He's the coder for Pixar. So he's a little, little bit type A. But for me, this was one of my favorite shots just because of the amount of time. So that's something, too, that I'm saying, throughout this presentation is when we're looking at work, and I look at a lot of photographers' work, and I'll see something. Like I'll see, I'm getting into wildlife photography, and I'll see, like, this perfect moment, where this tiger's jumping through, this brush, and I'm like, how did this person get this? What I'm not seeing is the years of research. I'm not seeing the thousands of photos that didn't work, all the time it took. So a lot of these shots, I'm willing to put in that time. So for me, 2.5 years wasn't really that much time for something that I really wanted because I had that vision. And it's all about putting in the time to create something unique. But moments in time are really cool. It gives me the ability to really have fun and create something that's a little bit more unique. And that leads me into, well, if we can control time, if we understand all these times of day, can we create something that's a little bit more extraordinary? Whoops, we'll go back to that one. Can we create something that's a little bit more extraordinary? And we can. So this is Petra and Jordan. A lot of you guys have been here, Petra Jordan. How many of you guys visited because you saw Indiana Jones? Anybody? Okay, me too. Me too. So my nephew told me that this is in Transformers, and this is where the Decepticons are. Yeah, okay, see, yeah, okay. I loved Indiana Jones when I was a kid. It influenced me. I even bought an Indiana Jones hat when I was there. I couldn't help it. Wore it around when I was shooting. But now maybe Transformers is going to inspire a new generation of people to visit. If you haven't had a chance to do this, this is called Petra by Night. And they take all of these paper candles and they light them all, like one by one by one by one. And they have this beautiful lighting event in the ceremony. So I wanted to capture this. This is 100% artificial light. It's full dark. But after I did that, I left the camera still and I captured a series of 30-second exposures. I'll explain a little bit more about the astrophotography as well, to be able to create the star trails, because I wanted to have an extra element in the sky, not just a black sky. And that works in different parts of the world. So here's that same location in Santorini during a blue sky. So I just spent all this time telling you guys how important the weather is, right? How I need sky drama. Well, what happens when there's no sky drama? Well, you have the chance to do stars. Maybe not here in Dubai. You're probably not going to get as many stars. You'll get a couple. But in some locations, these small towns, villages, and things like that, when the sky's particularly clear, we can set up and we can shoot and we can capture the blue hour and then the stars streaking across the sky. So this is one of my favorite shots of Santorini because it's very unique. But it taught me something else. So before, like I said, if it was raining, I could just relax. If the sky was blue, I could just be frustrated and relax. But now if it's raining, I'm still shooting. If the sky is blue, I'm still shooting. Like there is always something that you can make no matter what. And it's interesting too because star trails I really like, but it's not the only thing that's, I'd say, cosmic, right? The northern lights are probably the heaviest culmination of everything having to go right. How many of you guys have seen the northern lights? Okay. You guys need to see the northern lights. It is life-changing. It's an amazing thing to see. And what's so cool about it is it literally is energy coming from the sun that has to hit the magnetic sphere and cause this. Not only that, where you are geographically as the Earth is rotating has to rotate into the magnetic storm. Plus, it has to be particularly clear, not too windy. You have to have a moon in the right position. So many things have to line up cosmically for this to happen. Position, everything. That's become one of my favorite things to photograph. Because when everything lines up and you're able to capture the lights over the location that you want with a moon behind you illuminating the landscape, it's the most special thing that you can do. But even the most meticulous planning, unless you live somewhere where you can shoot the northern lights all year round, you can't guarantee. You can be in Iceland or Norway for weeks and not see the northern lights. Or you can be there for a day and there can be amazing northern lights, like a KP7-8, which is off the scale, and it's completely cloudy, and nobody gets to see them. Or it can be going off in Canada and not on the side of the world that you're on. So it's a really special thing. And this type of photography is something I really enjoy. So this is the Church of the Good Shepherd, and this is in the South Island of New Zealand. Really cool place. And this is shot really wide at 14 millimeter, and you can see that the stars are sort of streaking across the sky. So let's say this is 300 30-second exposures. So in other words, the camera's locked down. For this is a dark sky reserve, so it's pretty typical settings like 1600 ISO, 3200 ISO, f2.8, 30 seconds. And what I'm doing is capturing each point of the star as it moves, and then bringing 300 layers into Photoshop. And if Photoshop miraculously does not crash after I do that, I select all of those layers and use the lighten blending mode. And that gives me the stars across the sky. Now notice that they're streaking almost completely parallel, so straight across at an angle. That's what happens when you shoot towards the east or the west, or the celestial meridian or the celestial equator, depending on which Wikipedia article you find. Now notice also that it starts to bend near the top and bend near the bottom, because that's where east and west is stretching into north and south. And if you shoot north and south, you get something completely different. You get the spin of the pole of the Earth. So a lot of people call it the Polaris. The Polaris is the North Star, but it's actually just, it can be north or south. And depending on where you are, closer to the equator, this is going to be really low in the sky. As you start to go north on the globe or south, it's going to position itself in different locations. It's going to move the rotation of the Earth. And it's a really beautiful place. This is in Indonesia, near Surabaya. This is Mount Bromo, and this is a national park there. Mount Bromo is the collapsed but still active volcano on the left. Semeru is the one in the background. This is one of the largest calderas in the world. I think it's in the top 5 or 6. And it's at altitude. It's actually, we're on the equator, but it's in altitude. And what happens is the cloud line comes, falls into this, and just starts to coalesce on the bottom. It's really cool. And it's a really fun place to photograph. And here I spent 4 mornings shooting this. And I'm really happy with it because it's the closest thing to an alien planet that I've ever been able to photograph. And what's interesting as well is just it's another thing, like all of these elements coming together. So if you want to get to the shot, it's going to be more of a summer shot because that's when you're able to get the clear skies with this. So a lot of planning going into it. But, whoops, so what's next though? That's the other thing. And I'm going to get through this section fairly quickly so we can take a break. How can I take my work to the next level? And the next level, literally, for me, was aerial photography. Aerial photography for me was another way where I'd be able to get into a helicopter. And my thought with aerial photography was, you know what? If I can position myself somewhere that nobody else can position themselves, it's not just a standard viewpoint, I can get something interesting. Like this is Surfer's Paradise with a double rainbow. Really, really cool opportunity to photograph this. And I was working with helicopter companies on trade. I'd contact them and say, if you guys log hours with me, I'll give you all the photos to use in your marketing. And it worked really well. Now, helicopters are really fun. You can even do a helicopter ride here in Dubai. You can get really interesting things. And it's really fun to fly in a helicopter and hang out and take photos. But the one thing that all helicopter rides have in common, they're so expensive. It's insane, like $1,000 for 15 minutes expensive. So when we were creating Photographing the World with f-stoppers, we decided that we were going to use a drone. And it was very interesting. So drone technology came out in 2013, 2014, and we created this Photographing the World, this tutorial series. And we brought a drone with us. And very quickly in Iceland, I'm only going to play a quick portion of this as I talk through it, we were able to get this amazing footage. Now, drones now are cool because you can see everything. Like visually, we can see what we're flying. But before that, in 2013, 2014, we'd basically slap a GoPro on the bottom of the drone, fly around, hopefully get the shot, and if you remember to turn the GoPro on and you get it back, you'd actually end up with this footage. But it taught me that, you know what? I really want to take photos with drones. So after that, I had to get a drone. I brought it to Japan, started taking all these photos, aerial perspectives of things that I haven't seen before, the cherry blossoms and different things like that. And I got so excited about it that I went to Shenzhen, walked right into the headquarters of DJI and said, I believe in the technology, what's next? And they said, we're going to give you the prototype of the Phantom 3, take it to Italy, see what you get. And I did. So here's the Phantom 2 in an old clunky box. Here's the Phantom 3 Pro, which was state-of-the-art at the time. It was the 6th one off the production line. And I brought it to Italy, and my first maiden voyage was over the Imperial Forum. Don't do that. You guys, it's nervous. I'm always nervous the first time I fly a drone. Do not fly over the Imperial Forum for your first ride. I was terrified. Didn't even get really good shots. But I started to fly all these places that I've seen dozens of times. When I was flying in Florence, a woman walked by. She looked at the screen. This is the first time we can see what we're flying. She looked at the screen. She said, "This is my city. My mother was born here. My mother's mother was born here, and I've never seen the city so beautiful at that view." And it really just opened up a perspective, literally new perspectives on the world that we can capture. And sure, it's not the best camera. It's not a Nikon D850 or a Hasselblad or anything, but my Nikon D850 can't fly. Neither can my iPhone. I'm not going to throw my iPhone up in the air. So that's what I always tell everybody. Can your camera fly? No. But it's fun. So these places, you can go off of these places. Like Venice, I showed you guys, that was one of the sunset shots. Fly over the water, look back, find all these really interesting compositions. And I was able at the end to fly over the Vatican, which is now completely forbidden. At the time, it wasn't. It was frowned upon, as we said. I probably shouldn't have done it. So part of the condition of working with DJI was we're building an article and content and a review, right? And I told my friends at DJI, I said, one or two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to get a really cool shot, or the police are going to shoot it down. Otherwise, either way, we're going to have an incredible story. And he's like, well, I hope it's the first one, not the second one. So we flew over the Vatican, and it was interesting because I'll skip past the footage for time. We were worried at the time that these photos that we were capturing and these videos that we were capturing, this is Meteora, I was actually there to capture different perspectives as well. We were actually concerned about the quality. Like, can these photos and videos be used in a professional environment because of the smaller cameras? So it's interesting enough, we were able to publish them. This was the first book that DJI put together on aerial photography. So we were able to publish these photos fairly large, and they look really nice. I had 6 photos published in this book called Above the World. But what really was interesting is this video, Lionsgate Entertainment, found this video for the movie John Wick 2. Has anybody seen John Wick? All right, it's a total guy movie, right? I love John Wick. He basically shoots a bunch of people, and it's crazy. So he was going to Rome. John Wick goes to Rome in John Wick 2. Lionsgate contacted me, and they said, can we use your footage? Where'd you find my footage? On YouTube. And I'm like, guys, it's shot on a Phantom 3 Pro at 4K. I'm not sure about the quality. So I sent them the footage, and Lionsgate in Hollywood looked at it, and they said, yeah, the quality's fine. And I was like, wow, you mean to tell me a $1,200 device, drone, can now shoot Hollywood quality footage for the most part for B-roll? And it's actually a really, really cool thing. So I was really, really happy that we're able to do this. And now with the technology changing, the sky's the limit. It's amazing. But after the break, this is what I want to talk to you guys about. And it's where we're going to tie it all together. So everything that I've shown you, photo and video, all ties into post-processing. And last thing I'll leave you guys with is I know some of the things that I talked about so far seem complicated, blending, time, all of these things, but everything breaks down to these basic things. Raw file adjustment, exposure blending, and this is interesting. So raw file adjustment is something you shoot. You can even see some iPhones here. You can shoot raw with your iPhone now. Raw files are incredible. We can move the shadows and the highlights around. So 90% of my photos that you've seen stay in Lightroom. I don't even need to go to Photoshop because I can adjust things. If I do need to go to Photoshop, it's because of layering. That's the exposure blending. Maybe it's bracketed exposures because the highlights were too strong, shadows were too dark. Maybe it's time. Then the magic happens in color and contrast, separating colors, adding contrast and drama in the sky. Sharpening, the last one that I'll go over too, details and noise reduction, is proportionate to what you are editing. So if you guys are doing all of your stuff for Instagram, don't even bother. Nobody will ever be able to tell if it's sharpened or softened or anything because it's 1080 by 1080. But if you're doing large format printing or anything like that, even large calendars, magazines, then that sharpening and softening of the areas of noise and sharpening details and edges becomes a little bit more crucial. But when we come back from the little break, I'm going to break down a lot of the shots that you guys have seen into before and afters, and I'm going to explain every technique that I've used, both if it's a single RAW and if it's moments in time. Oh, yeah, thank you. Hmm. Sounds like you're already on the right track. Hmm. Cool. Okay, cool. My pleasure. Hey. Yeah, no, thank you. Pleasure to meet you. Mm-hmm. Which one? Oh, yeah. Anything? Oh, hold on. Yeah, man. You're doing video, right? That should work. We're ready? Okay. Hope everybody is properly caffeinated instead of hydrated. Okay, good, good. I actually went with hydration. I feel like I'm cheating on the coffee, but it's okay. I'm actually flying out right after this presentation too, so back to the United States, so I have a lot of time to drink coffee on the way. So yeah, just to touch on this again, what I want to say is that I started using Photoshop in 1999, which was quite a long time ago for Photoshop. That's when version 5.0 came out. I don't even know what version they're on to now, 17, 18, I think. But when I learned Photoshop, there was no YouTube. There were no books on Photoshop. In fact, one of my teachers wrote the first classroom in a book the next year. So we had each other, we had learning on the job. My first job in Photoshop, I actually lied about my experience, said, yeah, I know how to use Photoshop. I had no idea, and I just kind of learned. But what's interesting to me now, if you get into photography today, the landscape of post-processing can be very complicated, especially if you go on YouTube. If you guys have ever gone on YouTube and searched anything like how to make my photos awesome, every video that comes up is amazing, right? Oh yeah, the videos on YouTube just fantastic. So I got very frustrated with that, and my process was built out of years of using Photoshop and Adobe products before I even got into photography. So utilizing it in simple, efficient, and I'm going to be using the word seamless ways. Seamless is going to be very important. So let's kind of take a look at some examples here. So this is the shot. This is Seljalandsfoss in Iceland. This is straight out of camera. This is, at the time, probably would have been the Nikon D800 that I was shooting. So a single RAW has some issues. This is matrix metering, so I'm let the camera meter everything in the scene. It's a few second exposure for the soft waterfall. But what you're seeing is the sky is a little bit blown out. By blown out, the highlights, losing the highlights. The shadows are a little dark, so that's going to need adjustment. All the way to the left side, you guys see that little vehicle? That's a tour bus. So nothing says remote destination in Iceland like Chinese tour bus. So the tour bus must go as well. So before and after. So that's it. From a single RAW, being able to adjust the highlights back to balance and drop the shadows. So these are single RAWs that I'm adjusting here. So like Hallstatt again, single RAW, you can see that what we get during the blue hour, this is a very common thing that happens, is we get the reflected blue light. And you're seeing that on the rooftops, on the mountains are a little bit blue. And do you see that streak in the water? That's a duck. Now, as landscape photographers, you actually come to hate wildlife because it keeps getting in your frame. You're like, really, birds, do you have to go through my long exposure? Really, ducks, do you have to glide? You know, because they glide through the water, quack, 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 quack. They leave all of these streaks. So you have to get rid of distracting elements. But what I've done here with the before and after is I've just brought the colors back to harmony. So, and really down here in this lower right, pay attention very closely to the colors of the building and also the reflection. On the before shot, it's a little dull, but on the after shot, I've actually brought back those individual colors. So the camera actually sees a lot. Our eyes see so much color separation, but the camera captures light accumulation. And that's when the blue light from the sky is going to start accumulating. So it's capturing for a series of time and seconds, and we have to go in and then separate these colors so it looks more natural, more like what our eyes saw to begin with. And that's beyond a white balance issue. That's just the accumulation of light in a photograph. And it's fun. So here's the attempt of the New Zealanders to reach the island. That was impossible. So you can see this is straight out of camera. A few things are going on here. There's a footprint there on the left. There's a beer bottle in the background. This isn't a Heineken ad, so we definitely want to get rid of that beer bottle. And this is typically what happens in a sunrise situation or sunset. The sky is just totally intense. And so I'm going to need to adjust the sky, know that. And then pay attention here to the shadows of the pylons, because when I actually go to the after, what I've done is corrected the highlights in the sky, and when I moved the shadow slider, when I just pushed the shadows up, I had all this beautiful green moss in there. So the balance of a single RAW from this to this, just to bring it back. And that's just shifting things around in Adobe Lightroom. Pretty simple. But what if we want to start talking about time? And this is where it starts to get really interesting. This is one of my favorite areas in New Zealand. This is Mount Cook in the background. Really beautiful mountain to photograph. This whole area is a dark sky reserve. You can go do astrophotography and see the stars in the Milky Way with your naked eye. This is the road to Mount Cook, and I'm shooting standing on the side of the road. I tried to stand in the middle of the road, then figured out I might die. That was a bad idea. And I needed to do a blend shot, standing in the side or on the side of the road with a telephoto lens. So this is like 120 millimeter compressed. So I got this nice leading line of the road. But what I wanted to do was something a little bit different. I wanted to add the trails or the light trails of cars. So once I established the shot, we got there, traffic was going back and forth, and then after sunset, there was no traffic, no more traffic. So I had my friends drive back and forth for me over and over and over and over again. I've used this this is a great technique. This is called the make your friends drive the car over and over and over and over again technique. But it was cool. So what I did is I set up for a night shot, 30-second exposures, and I just kept clicking the camera over and over again, and I get pieces of the trails. And then I bring all these layers in using a blending mode. It's a really important blending mode for blending, conveniently enough, called lighten. And what lighten does is allows everything that's above 50% gray into white to show through. Everything that's below 50% gray to black disappears. So in this case, the highlights here just appear right inside of the road. So it's really fun. So moments in time, blending moments in time. This is really fun. And again, what I say when we get into post-processing is don't panic. Has anybody read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Okay. What's printed on the front of the book? Big block letters. Don't panic. Same thing with post-processing. It's not as intimidating as you might think. So let's get back to this shot where I said Osaka Castle, cherry blossoms, and here's that sky that I was talking about. Well, this is, kind of adjusted raw, some of the shadows, but it's still flat. And I like the sky, it has potential, but 15 minutes later, and the lights came on. So 15 minutes later, the cherry blossoms are illuminated, the castle is illuminated, and that's step 2. So the first one, remember, raw file adjustment. The second one, this would be blending, again, using the blending mode. And then the next step would be contrast adjustment to bring those colors back. So just 3 simple steps to be able to create that image. And no complex masking, just simple masking in blending mode. Now, again, this is straight out of camera. This is one of the famous viewpoints in Santorini, the sunset spot, everybody calls it. I don't know if you guys have been to Santorini, but they've basically branded the sunset. Like they say that they have the best sunset in the world, and it attracts people. And if you have 1,000 people watching the sunset, when the sun sets, the whole island claps. Like they erupt into applause. Like it's this spectacular thing that's never happened before. So this is the sunset that we're looking for, straight out of camera, needs some adjustment, sky has potential, and then with a blending mode and some contrast, we're able to give it a little bit more light. So something a little bit more unique. I will get this question at the end. Now this is important to address that the tripod needs to stay as still as possible. You set the focus, turn it to manual focus so it won't refocus, and then you're taking your shots over and over again as time progresses, usually every minute or 2 minutes, depending on how the light changes. But the most important thing is you have to not bump your tripod, so you have to be very careful. And in busy locations, you have to protect your tripod. And you have to protect your tripod from the people who want to do selfies, because this very interesting thing happens all over the world. If I'm here, say there's going to be 1,000 people here, and I'm first one there, set up in the tripod, and there's 30 meters of shooting area. Everybody just assumes that the person with the tripod knows something that they don't. Maybe you guys have had this issue before. So then they come up and they want the position. You're like, no, I can't move, I'm blending, but you can stand anywhere you want and get the same photo. So they'll do the selfie over top you, around. So you have to protect your tripod. You start to yell at people sometimes. You're like, no, don't bump the tripod. So I'm a very nice guy. The last thing you want to do is bump my tripod. That's when my angry button turns on, bumping the tripod. So that's how these are able to be put together, because like here again, this is straight out of camera for that shot that you guys saw. So this is funny because this is what happens when we shoot what I've done, I wanted to do this in a single exposure. If you guys are shooting Nikon or Fujifilm, or most cameras except for Canon, Canon's a little bit more limited on their dynamic range, we can pull a lot of detail out of the shadows. So sometimes 2 to 3 stops in the shadows. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that I expose for all the highlights, and here the sky I wanted to make sure I expose for the highlights, knowing that I can bring the shadows up. So this is typically when I'm in Lightroom, this is what I start with, and then this turns into this. So you can see the sky, I've adjusted the contrast, brought the luminosity up, and then I've brought the blue hour back on top of it and brought the white color out. So I had the same issues here. I had a lot of bounce light, and this was the same thing that happens during a sunset. Notice how this is really dark, but I have that pink reflection. So I'm bouncing that light onto the surface. So what I'll actually go in and do with some simple masking is I'll remove some of that bounce light. And what we call that is color separation. Color separation is one of the last things you learn in post-processing because it's something that takes a long time to master. So people ask me this as well, like how long do you spend in post-processing? Do you spend an hour? Do you spend 10 hours? And my answer is sometimes I spend 10 minutes, maybe I spend an hour, 10 hours, or 3 years. It's weird, right? 3 years. Because here's what happens. Like let's say it's an easy image, I spend 15, 20 minutes, I edit it in Photoshop, I look at it and I'm like, you know, it needs something else. Like, I'm not sure what it is. And I'll close it. I'll open it in a few days and I'll make some tweaks. It's getting a little better, needs some work, and then I'll forget about it for a year. I'll forget about the image and I'll be like, what's this? Because, you know, the only reason that I forget about it or find it is because I run out of space on my hard drive. And I'm like, I need to remove stuff. Oh, what's this? And I'll open it and I'll be like, oh, why didn't I ever finish this? Oh, because there's bounce light. And then I'll take away the bounce light, separate some of the colors, adjust the blues a little bit so it feels like there's depth. You can see there's the white here, it's darker in the background, but there's depth in these colors. And then I'll just know and I'll feel intuitively, I'm finished. Even if it was 2 years, was only maybe about 4 hours of work all put together. So for me, the post-processing is as long as it takes. But color separation is the most important thing that I like to focus on. This gets into the most frustrating element of why, let's say, for example, previous to the raw technology getting to where it is, previous to the software being able to process that raw data. Let's say when I was shooting the Nikon D700, I wasn't able to recover shadows. I had to use a term that I hate to use now, HDR. You guys remember HDR. Most people cringe when you say it. The idea of HDR was to overcome the limits of the camera sensor by blending multiple exposures together. The fault of HDR and why people cringe when they think about it is it came with a bunch of other sliders. After you could blend everything together, you could turn everything to 100 and it went crazy. But this is what happens to me. When I first started shooting landscape photography, I was like, man, that sky's amazing. But what happens when you shoot into the sky? Well, the foreground's dark. So what we can do with raw file adjustment and a little bit of blending is we can just bring all that back. So it's actually there. Like that's mostly a single raw. So from darkness to light, the single raw. And then what I've done is see these highlights here? These highlights happened before the sun actually touched the horizon. So since I didn't move the camera, I was able to then just bring those highlights back on the trees and add a little bit of bounce light from the sky. This creates a little bit more color separation and depth. It's really interesting. And this is a landscape problem, but it's also a cityscape problem. So the same thing, like shooting into the sun and having a dark foreground. Because this is the situation that occurs. And this is why blending comes into play. When the sun sets and everything's really vivid, there's only a few lights on. See, the street lights are coming on. But 15 minutes later, and everything's on. All of the lights are on. So this gives me the ability to blend all this time together. But I need to point something out as well. Remember how I said the gray hour here in Dubai and the blue 8 minutes? Yeah, anything like that. Like really, to get that sunset and the lights at the same time, your sunset here in Dubai is not going to last more than a few minutes before the colors are gone. And then by the time it's dark out, usually the clouds kind of dissipate here, is what I've noticed. But I've shot near the solstice around May or June in Rome, and the sky has been vivid all the way through the blue hour. If you're in, like I said, Stockholm, Sweden, and you're shooting, I have some shots of the blue hour where the sun is still like beautiful colors in the sky. So this technique, it overcomes the limitations of where you are in the globe and what you're shooting. But it's not impossible to get all of these elements together. Like the fog shot in Dubai was sunrise with some of the lights on still and the fog, everything happening at the right moment. That wasn't a blend. That was just the right time. So it's not completely unnatural. It's just putting it back together of what could happen. And blending gets really fun. We get into other things here. Like this is Hong Kong. And I love this shot because if you guys have been to Hong Kong, you can go up here. This is an area, if you go to, it's called the Peak. It's the big mall. You'll go there one time, see the view, and you'll leave because there's 1,000 people. If you walk around Lugard Road for about 1.5 kilometers, you get this view. One of the most incredible cityscape views I've ever seen. If you go in the summertime, around June, July, August, the sun will rise right over the river. Now this is, again, the same situation, and the sun's coming up, so this was before and then after. So what I was able to do was bring in the blue hour, all of those lights, and still maintain the sun. The only complex thing about this, and I teach this in one of the lessons in my Photographing the World series, was then making sure that I represent extra bounce light. So before, you can see that I'm changing these colors, but I have the light hitting the bay. I actually wanted to increase that. Whoops, I wanted to increase that to get it. So sometimes post-processing is about adding color, increasing color and contrast, and sometimes it's about removing it, removing the color cast. So questions at the end. We always have to think about whether we need to adjust something and or remove color. Sometimes things are too much. Sometimes things are too vibrant, too vivid, to the point where it looks like we manipulated them. Constantly in landscape photography, I'm having to remove color because it was too intense. It was too pink or too vibrant. But this is a really fun example of just putting all this stuff together. But these have all been like two-stage blends. What if we have different elements? This is really fun. So the pylons, Brooklyn Bridge pylons, coldest day of my life ever shooting, freezing, not able to use the buttons through my gloves, and a 30-second exposure. And I really like this, and I shot a sequence of 30-second exposures, and when I was in Lightroom, I really liked this one, because I thought the sky just looked so cool, and you can see that sun, you can actually see the globe of the sun just kind of going behind that haze, and you see these clouds streaking this way, kind of wrapping around like they're caressing the city itself. But what I didn't like is I lost the light on the foreground. But the previous exposure actually had the light on the foreground. But the problem was the sun was still in the frame and it was too bright. So what I did is I just utilized the little bit of light on those pylons using a blending mode. Then everything was set. The stage was set to just wait a little bit longer for the lights in the Manhattan skyline to come on. So that was 1, 2, 3-stage blend. So 3 exposures blended together to create this. And then after the exposure blending process that I showed you guys then is just color and contrast adjustments. Now, it's interesting too because we can use this technique after. It's not to say that you don't have to do some color adjustments between blending. Sometimes that does happen. But for the most part, you're blending elements of the same thing over top of each other. As long as the camera doesn't move, you could bring one element in on a separate layer, change the opacity, and all of the lines, everything's going to line up. So this is very, 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 very powerful. So in this case, we're able to do that as long as the camera doesn't move. But something else that's actually kind of interesting, and this is a really cool example, is when we really have to go out of our way to put something together that's pretty extraordinary. So everything else was focused on that shot of the pylons. I just had to focus one time and set up the camera and then just shoot. The difficult part with that one was removing the neutral density filter without bumping my own camera. You don't want to be the one that bumps your own camera. I already expect, because that will mess up your shot. So with this is actually the Church of the Good Shepherd in New Zealand, and this is the accumulation. So this is me set up, shooting f2.8, 1600 ISO, 30-second exposures to be able to get the accumulation of the stars. And what you're actually seeing here is the accumulation of a few hundred stars stacked together. So these 30-second exposures, you can see how quickly they move across the sky. So while the sky looks pretty good, can you guys see any problems with the foreground? That's about 30 selfies going on right there. People light painting, people moving around. It's a very popular location where people just kind of hang out. And so that's not going to work. So what I do, again, you guys know that I get there very early, I get set up, and I do what's called a controlled shot. So for everything else like that, I always have a control, the base shot. So this is a blue hour shot of the Church of the Good Shepherd. This is shot at f8 with a low ISO of 100, aperture priority, probably about 20 seconds, just so that I can get everything. So everything is intact, everything is razor sharp, and that way I can basically take this image with the stars and this image to get that together. That way, I actually can use all of the color in the foreground and the integrity and then blend the sky in. So it's actually really fun to be able to do this. The other thing too, this is not something you can always do with astrophotography when you're shooting the Milky Way, but when you shoot everything at night at f2.8, it does hurt the quality. And also when things are fully dark, you're not really getting all those highlights that you get and the shadow detail that you get during the blue hour. So this I can now print extremely large because every part of the image is crisp from end to end. And it's actually really fun. So this entire technique, everything that I do from start to finish, I just want to show you guys, if you're interested, I actually do teach. Sorry, my clicker's acting funny. I actually do teach this in video tutorials. Last year we did the third one here in Dubai, which was really interesting. And I used the fog shot as an example. So we were here last February filming, doing different things. But it's a little bit different. The way that I like to teach, and I do this with, if you guys are familiar with fstoppers.com, we spend about a year creating this series. We travel all over the world, and what I do is we film the entire process of arriving at a location, scouting the location, setting up the camera, going through the camera settings, shooting through the entire location, bringing those photos into Lightroom, deciding which ones to use, and we go all the way through post-processing. So every single one of the photos that we capture in the field, the pylons, the Brooklyn Bridge pylons are one of the ones that we use in that tutorial. Every step from start to finish, so you can kind of learn. And each one has a lot of different lessons. 14 hours of education. So that gives you an idea how cold it was in New York. It was very cold in New York. So usually you're going to get a lot of education with it, all the post-processing, and the most important thing that I wanted to cover here, if you are interested in learning this, the video tutorials, I include all of the raw files. And if you guys have been following me on social media and you know the Canon thing, yeah, some of you guys know. We have so far, one person did use one of the raw files and Canon shared it and it was a big thing. So if you do download the videos, you purchase and download the videos, don't share the raw files because apparently the internet doesn't like that. But it's actually fun. Like everything is included to learn. And again, fstoppers.com, or you can just go to my website. But what I really want to say is this, what you're seeing, everything that I've showed you guys has been the progression of years of development, years of ideas, doing different things. You know, starting very simple, you know, learning obviously how to utilize composition, how to use light, how to use colors, and really learning the landscape. And then as I started progressing, I started getting into the time blending. And now I started to do more drone photography. I'm starting to get into a little bit of nature photography, which is kind of like starting over, even though I can use all of my composition abilities. But what I want you guys to understand is photography, especially landscape and cityscape, or especially landscape, I would say, but this is your landscape, so urban landscape, has to be a passion because it's a very difficult genre of photography to run a successful business in. So what I like to say is that photography isn't just something you see with your eyes, it's something that you can feel with your heart. And a lot of these places, what I'm really trying to do is be in these locations to fully understand them, to take advantage of spending that time to really feel like, you know what, this location is going to be best represented during a sunset or during this season, fall colors, cherry blossoms or something, because I'm feeling emotional when I'm shooting, and I feel like as I'm following my heart in these locations, that goes through and it'll shine through. So when somebody sees these images, my hope is that they feel something from them. It does something, communicates to their heart, not only to their eyes. And that's something that's really important when you're taking photos. It's also a good philosophy when you're getting into this style of photography. One, don't panic. I love to say it. You're going to look at you're going to look at other people's work, and you're always going to find somebody that you think is better than you. It's always going to happen. I do it all the time. And the other thing is, I've been doing this now for 8 years, full time. And I still look back at my old work, and I don't like it. And I'm still working on the stuff that I'm working on now, and I'm like, it could be better. It could be better. I hope that if I have the ability, or if I'm lucky enough to do this for 20 or 30 years, that I'll still feel that way. That every day, every time that I shoot, I'll still feel like I can improve. Because that's how I know that this is something that I want to do. If there's ever a time in your life where you feel like you've mastered photography, it's time to quit, because you've totally missed the point. Everything that we have in common as photographers is we're all trying to get better at photography. And that is a universal thing. And the most important thing is have fun. Small little story, when I learned how to surf, I basically was paddling out and I didn't know anything. It turned out I lived across the street from professional surfers. It wasn't until a friend of mine pointed out that they were in the national tour, and I'm like, oh, that's just my friends, you know? Really nice people. But I remember watching them catch these waves and do these amazing things. And I was getting really frustrated. I'm like, man, I just can't figure out how to do this. And I was talking to them one day when I was out there. I'm like, man, I wish I could do what you're doing. And my friend told me, he said, are you having fun? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'm having fun. He's like, then that's all that matters, as long as you're having fun. So with this stuff too, if it's a passion, you follow your passion, you follow your heart, then you're going to succeed. And that's it. You'll get better with time. You put the time in, but make sure that you enjoy it, and your work comes from your heart. That's the biggest message and the best thing that I can communicate to you guys. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much. And now I'm going to open it up to questions, actually. I have a lot. I can't tell if people are raising their hands or just taking photos, or both. So you guys ask me questions about any of the process. It can be about anything. Hair care products is fine too. Yeah, if we have a microphone, that's wonderful.
Hi. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have two questions. One is, can you point out where is the bounce light in a specific photo? And then how do you use it to your advantage? The second is, how many photos do you usually need to blend to create the final image?
Identifying the bounce light is usually just about removing it. Let's take a blue hour, for example. So that's when the roofs of the building, anything that's essentially a white object is going to turn a little bit blue. If you're shooting in a winter landscape and you're shooting near a sunset in a blue hour, you're going to get like pink on the snow. Snow's going to change color. Or you're also going to get blue. Everything's going to change. So at that point, when you look at that, obviously things are reflective. But when you look at it on a photo, it seems like it's a mistake. Like it shouldn't be blue snow. It shouldn't be blue roofs that are white. So you actually go in and just make a quick selection of that area, and you mitigate it by just removing the saturation. Like you can use something simple, like a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and you can just pull it down 20%. The key is, though, you don't want to remove all the color. You want to leave a little bit there, because then something will look like you desaturated it. So you kind of have to identify what looks natural. And it can be a little bit difficult. So, color separation is a balance. But as far as the formula for the right amounts of frames for blending, it's funny. The blending moments in time, it took me years to really understand when it's going to work. Because when I first started doing it, I'd go to a location and I'd think, you know what? This is going to be an awesome time blend. And then I'd get into post-processing and I'd realize, you know what? It looks better just at blue hour, or it looks better at sunset. And then it'd be a single frame. But usually, I'd say the majority of the time, it's just two. It's a sunset and a blue hour together. And it really works in those locations where you have both artificial and natural light. You're trying to use a harmony of those. And that's really cityscapes, old villages. I really like Greece and Italy for examples like that. But typically, it's just going to be two. If you start to blend other elements, sometimes if it's a busy location, for example, you can shoot sunset and like you have people standing doing selfies. Like if you shoot a few different frames, sometimes you could just use different pieces of that, and that's not really the time, but sometimes little elements like that, or if the gondola are moving through in Venice, you might put one here and put one there, try to do that. then it goes a little bit more. But you kind of have to be the judge. The interesting example of that, though, is not really the amount of images that you put together. It's the span. That's what becomes most crucial about blending. You can't get too greedy about it. And you'll start to see things where, like for me, I can definitely do 15 or 20 minutes, but it can't be like a middle of the day where the sun's shining down and there's all these lights on. Like you're not going to register that as real because you actually can't quantify that in post or in your visual, like your mind cannot quantify that. So I'll see photos of like the sunset and the Milky Way, and I'll be like, wow, technically executed perfectly, but for me, I can't wrap my head around that. I'm like, it's great, but it just doesn't work for me. I can't associate the Milky Way galaxy with the sun. So your span of time, that's really what becomes more crucial. The amount of elements that you put together is purely tactical in what you need.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, my
Yeah.
question is mainly for HIPAA. Now, such kind of images, is it, acceptable for them to be in the contest? Because mainly when they ask for the, the raw files,
Yes.
somehow the raw file is not really a reflection of the real image. So, because I do, some of the digital blending, so I'm always scared to put this kind of images for the contest.
Yeah, contest guidelines are really interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a National Geographic landscape photographer about this too. And he really likes the time blending, but he's so frustrated that he can't do it because they need the raw file and they can only make minor adjustments. Yeah, that's something that I don't know because the parameters of the contest are kind of interesting to me. Like you cannot blend time, but you can leave your shutter open for 2 minutes because that's something you see naturally. So some of these contest guidelines are a little funny. But yeah, with the blending, with the traditional style of contest, they're still looking for the single photo. So I'd be able to submit like the panoramic Dubai fog because I just did some basic removal of some structure in the foreground, but it's basically a single raw. But even then, I'm not sure because we're also starting to see a lot of situations like the classic one with Nikon with the airplane. Do you guys remember that? Where it was looking up and it turned out that somebody took a piece of clip art and didn't even do it well. So I don't know. I think that in the future contests are going to have to allow for some of this because what we want as viewers is we want to see extraordinary work. And when we're doing documentary photography, when we're doing these kind of things, obviously it's just about the moment. But when we're talking about landscape photography, when we start to use shadows and highlights and time, what we're really looking for is a beautiful image and an emotional response. And sometimes that's very, very difficult to do. Like you guys saw, if you're shooting like a beautiful sunset and the foreground's really dark, obviously that's not going to be a contest winner. So that's something that I hope to see change. But as of now, you just have to, yeah, I wouldn't submit one of my blended shots because I know that I could produce 2 raw files for them and like a PSD, like it is the sum of its parts, but I'm not sure if I could. Good question, too.
Allow me to answer this question. I mean, on behalf of HIPAA.
Yeah.
We accept that actually if it doesn't affect the authentication of the subject. If you are not removing anything or not adding anything, it is not changing dramatically the scene. If it's really a blending technique, we accept that. I mean, I'm talking about HIPAA.
Okay. That's very cool.
Yes, you can submit.
Oh. You guys might see me again then. I like that. See, that's really interesting because I was at a festival in Portugal, and a couple of the guys there, even the National Geographic team, said, you're not really manipulating anything because you're using the elements that are already there. I'm not adding a sky, I'm not adding something. It's all natural, even though it's blended. So that's a very progressive way of thinking. That's great. I like that. So there you go. It's a happy answer. Thank you.
Okay, more questions?
Hello.
Hey.
Kind of a bit personal rather than technical.
Can you
It's kind of personal rather than technical.
Okay.
I'm sure I'm speaking for myself, and I think I speak for a lot of people. How do you get about to become a world photographer? Who pays the bills?
Who pays the bills?
I want.
I don't know. I mean, always get versions of this question, but I really like the way you phrased that. Who pays the bills? Well, this is. I'll give you. You asked a personal question. I'll give you a very personal answer. When we started, that's my wife and I. For one, I had a I still do, have a very supportive wife who's also a photographer. But we lost our house in 2007, 2008 in the global housing crisis. We had to file bankruptcy. It's one of the reasons we had to move. So that shot of Meteor, when I said I was eating bread, that's the truth. I also could not afford a camera at that time. I was borrowing my friend's Nikon D3, which I thought was really funny because he's like, yeah, you're a photographer. You'll take care of the camera. I'm like, yeah, okay. But I did. So my first computer for post-processing, I borrowed money from a friend. My grandmother gave me the money to buy my first camera in this. So there was a lot of support system. And what we do is on the refrigerator in our apartment, I'd sort of have this, like we had this dry erase board. And I started to realize that if I don't go out to dinner at all, like 4 times going out a month equals a lens that I need. It equals a few more days in these locations. So what we did is we took the little bit of finances we had and put it together to be able to take some trips. And after, it was very difficult too, because after you file bankruptcy, they don't give you, we weren't allowed to have credit cards. So even to book a car rental, a friend of mine gave me a credit card under his account just so we could do that. Same friend, one of my best friends still to the day. So we pushed the limits of it. And when we became location independent, I remember we sold Naomi's car, and that turned into the tripods. And then we'd have a garage sale, and we started getting rid of our possessions. And those possessions turned into the gear that we needed, the bags, the lenses, everything that we needed. But when we left, we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't really have a surplus or a backup plan. We don't come from a wealthy family, so we don't have what we call a safety net. We just had a really strong passion to succeed. And in the beginning, we basically calculated that if we were living in an apartment, this is what it costs us to live. And my wife is a graphic designer. She could do her work from everywhere. Photography, I just need an internet connection and all this stuff, social media. So we calculated that it costs us this amount of money to live in a location. If we get rid of the rent, if we get rid of cell phones, if we get rid of television, if we get rid of car insurance, if we get rid of all these things, then we can take the same amount of money and we have a daily amount that we can live around the world. So for the first few years, we'd spend everything that we had just to go around, and occasionally projects would come in. And then really around 2013, things started to change. The social media landscape changed. I was able to communicate directly with camera companies, different companies, start getting projects to the point now today, 2016, 17, and 18, mostly the clients that I'm working for, the companies that I'm working for, whether it's camera manufacturers, I work with really great stuff, the tripods, or I'm doing a series of work. I work directly with the Greek government to do tourism products, photographs. All of that is usually paid for. So usually now I'd say that 90% of my travel and expenses is paid for based on the project that I'm working on or pitching. And the other 10% is us wanting to do passion projects, but even those passion projects turn into something else. Like we know if we're going to go to Tibet this year, then naturally we're going to probably turn it into a photographic tour. So the way that I've sort of crafted the business around photography hasn't just been selling the photos. It's been teaching, education, workshops, some printing, different things like that, consulting, product development. All of these things around the photography industry have sort of led me to today. But it's been years of work, and a lot of times we thought we had to quit, and there were a lot of times we thought we weren't going to make it, but we kept doing it, and we just kept to it.
Wish you luck.
Thank you.
One more, a bit personal.
Yeah.
I think it's the techniques that you use do not allow for human I've noticed from the little bit of photos that no human beings are shown in your photos. And usually, I don't know, but traveling the world does implies that there should be people. But
Yes, I understand your question. The complete lack of humans or anything in my work is done on purpose. Yeah, so traveling, the cultural part of it is really important. But for me, it's like if you guys have gone to Rome and gone to the Colosseum in the afternoon, how many people are there? It's ridiculous. Like you don't want to, some of these destinations, you don't want to be where the people are. So when I go to visit these places, I would go first thing in the morning because I want to have a special emotional connection to this place. So what I'm trying to create is a scene rather than a photo, something you feel like you could walk into all alone. And the only time that I'll use people, like if it's I have photographs of ice caves and things like that, then somebody posing dramatically for a sense of scale. But if I don't need a sense of scale, I don't need a sense of scale for a town or a city or a landscape. But so I can do that, removing people. But that's my personal style. Some people will put that element, but it's interesting that you notice that as well. I guess it is pretty noticeable because there are no people. And I'll go out of my way to remove them sometimes. But that is just because I want people to have a personal connection. I feel like if there's just other random tourists in the shot, it wouldn't be as good, but also it doesn't feel as special. You know, you want to be in the bamboo forest by yourself or with somebody close to you. You want to have this special experience. So that's what I'm trying to create. Good question.
Sure. In the photo of you took a photo of the church. So I wanted to know in the star trail, what application you use for that. And I'm hoping it's the one I'm thinking about because I have a question about the number of stars that you had to adjust to be able to get that.
Yeah. So let me go back to that actually. Yeah, the technique for stars is really interesting. Yeah. There's something here like this accumulation here. It's called star stacking. So there are a couple plugins that do this in Photoshop, but I do it manually. So I'll actually, inside of Lightroom, I'll take all of the exposures and I'll export them as JPEG. And I know that JPEGs are bad and everything, but try to load 300 TIFF files into your Photoshop and see what happens. Especially when it's 40-something megapixel, it's not going to do anything. So bring those into Photoshop, and then I change it to the light and blending mode, and it all comes through like this. All the light. That's why you're seeing the light here, here, here. Now, if you do this with most software, it's going to give you these streaks. So notice how these are just linear lines. There's no fade. If I actually go to the image itself, you can see how they fade from time. So what I want to be able to do is control that fade. So it's basically, let's say you have 100 layers. The one on the top is going to be 100%, and then 99, 98, 97, 96, 95, all the way down to 0 opacity. So I like to be able to do it manually. Now, I think Star Stacks is a plugin, I believe, that does it automatically, and they say they adjust the tail. But the other thing is I like to be able, anything that's potentially wrong, when you use a plugin, it does it manually, merges it. Inside of Photoshop, if I bring everything in manually, if there's a problem, I can adjust it. A lot of the times, like airplanes are going by, different things, I have to do some spot removal. So it's just, my personal thing is, I enjoy post-processing. So when some people don't want to spend a couple hours stacking the stars, I actually think it's kind of fun. So I feel like if you do things manually, then if you do find a plugin and use it and it doesn't work, then you can at least go in and do it. But essentially, it's a simple process of just stacking in the light and blending mode.
Hi.
Yeah.
My question is, how do you save the composition through the days? Like the first day you come and take the first picture, and the next day you come at the same composition, the same everything.
You're not seeing multiple days, only a couple hours. If you wanted to do time blending over the series of days, you could try to leave your camera set up for days. You could try to leave the tripod in the location and bring the camera back, but I haven't tried to do that. I think the longest blend I did was shooting through sunset and all night, and we were camping, and then I also shot the morning, so it shot all the way through. But there was never a time where I removed the camera. The camera would stay there, so that's why you're only seeing it for a couple hours. I don't think it might, I mean, I'm sure it is possible to go back to a location and set up and get something similar, but it's always going to be off a little bit. So this is also the situation, the problem I'm having with like drone photography, for example. Like with drone photography, the drone moves a little bit for one, and you have a 20-minute battery. So if all that light doesn't change in 20 minutes, it's impossible, and it's moving. So there are some limitations as well. No problem. Oh, hey.
My question is regarding the same picture.
Sure.
So this line of a star,
Hmm.
how long it takes until this movement is complete?
Oh, good question. Yeah, how long does it take for the stars? So this is kind of cool actually, because if I advance this to, if we actually go back to the shots here, almost there. Here, this is interesting. So the stars near the equator, east to west, move much faster than the center of the rotation. So if you can see that this is a few hours of time, that's moved tremendously, but you can see right in the center, see how those have barely moved? So depending on your orientation, if you're facing east and west, the stars move much faster and you need much less. The other thing is too, I'm shooting at, I think around 24 millimeter here, which is still pretty wide. If you're shooting, the wider you shoot, the less they're gonna move. If you zoom in, then they're gonna move a lot through the frame. So you basically just have to calculate it. So usually what I'll do is try to shoot somewhere between 200 and 300, and on average I'll probably use 150. Because I like either, shorter star trails of like, 50 or 60, where they just look like little comets, or I'll try to get the complete wrap around the sky. But it's much easier when you're dealing with a situation like this, because they're just gonna fly across the sky right in the middle. Yeah, a couple of hours. So if you, and this is tough, I have to protect the tripod. But in this situation, I set up maybe, I went up there about midnight, 1 in the morning, and I'd shoot stars from like 2 a.m. all the way to 6 a.m. and then shoot the sunrise. And I did that for 4 days. For the Church of the Good Shepherd shots, I just stay all night because I want to shoot the sunrise as well, and the sunset and then the sunrise. So sometimes all night to get the shot. So bring like you play Angry Birds, bring a book. yeah. Do something, you watch Netflix, you can. Whatever gets you through it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We would like to thank
Thanks, guys.
And we would like to take a group photo, please. Stand as you are and come a little bit close to the center. Selfie, بلاش ما we don't like selfie.
I think you guys have done this before, so I'm just going to follow instructions. Oh, very nice.
This is a medal which we give it to all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for the presentation. It was very amazing.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's
It
my
was
pleasure.
amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It will not be the last one.